Hello, church. Pastor Ron here, coming with our weekly reflection as we continue to read through the New Testament together during this season of Lent. We've landed this week in the book of Hebrews, and it's really an appropriate place for us to kind of center in upon as we walk through these kind of strange and different times that we find ourselves in. Maybe in the midst of COVID-19, many of you are feeling vulnerable. You're feeling like there's a loss of control that you once felt like you did have. Maybe you're feeling stress. Maybe you're feeling some anxiety or angst or anxiousness in your life because of all of these changes. Some of you may have literally lost work, and financial gain is what concerns you at these moments as you struggle with your job loss. There may be many of you who are struggling. You have your children at home, and that's a real blessing to be able to invest in their lives and enjoy some precious moments slowing down together as a family. But at the very same time, it can cause a sense of impatience and a sense of maybe getting on each other's nerves and struggling with our attitudes and our actions. I know for Leslie and I, it's been a different time as well, and we miss, for example, our littles, our grandchildren. We miss seeing Finn and Kate and Everin and being with them like we normally are, and with our kids. We notice a change in lots of things. Well, in the midst of times when we feel vulnerable, I think Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 to 16 are just the great thing for us to center in upon today. It's just the ticket for us when we're feeling vulnerable. We read these words, therefore, beginning in verse 14, therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. When I think about this passage today, of course, there's the allusion to the Old Testament priest, obviously, here in speaking of Jesus now as our great high priest. The Old Testament high priest shared many of the duties that all the priests had, but the one thing he did that was extraordinary from all the other priests is that he would enter into the Holy of Holies, what would be considered the very presence of God. The Israelite people were not really allowed to be in God's very presence, immediate presence. Only the high priest, once a year, would enter behind a curtain in the temple into the Holy of Holies, where he would offer sacrifice for the sins of the people, and where he would offer sacrifice that they might know forgiveness and grace. Well, what we see here is that Jesus is seen as the great high priest who has not entered into a human tabernacle made by human hands, but into the heavenlies themselves, into the very presence of God. But the sacrifice he brought was not a lamb. The sacrifice he brought was his very self. He died on the cross for our sins. Next week, Holy Week, we're going to be celebrating or commemorating, remembering, and sometimes in sober ways, and also in the same way, in same token, celebrating it as well, that Jesus went to the cross and died for your sins and my sins, that we might be forgiven. So this passage reminds us of that. But it also reminds us of some other things. It reminds us of the fact that Jesus entered into our very human experience, into our vulnerabilities, and he took all of those upon himself, and he took all of them to the cross. And so there's a couple of imperatives in light of what Jesus did for us. The first one is to let us hold firmly to the faith that we profess. Don't give up in these times when you're feeling like things are so different and it may be easy to give in and give up. We're reminded that God calls us, because of his great gift through Jesus, to hold firmly to the faith that we have in him. The second imperative is this, that let us then therefore approach God's throne of grace. In other words, let us come right into his presence. And the idea here is to constantly come into his presence, not just once, but continue to come into his presence boldly to this throne of grace. To draw near to God is the idea, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. The idea here is that we might find mercy and grace that result for us in timely aid. Maybe you need some timely aid today in the midst of these times. Maybe you need fresh forgiveness today. Attitudes and actions have gotten out of sorts, and you need his fresh forgiveness. He is waiting to give you fresh forgiveness. And today maybe you need a sense of strength and help in the midst of times when you feel impatient, anxious, stressed, and when you may feel even fearful. And today we're invited to come to the throne of grace. It may seem arrogant to come boldly and frankly to God, to just be genuine and open and honest. But really the truth is it's more arrogant of us not to come that way into his presence. Can you imagine? Here is Jesus at the right hand of the Father, interceding for us, but we will not allow him to do it. We won't let him express that gift for us to the Father because we want to do it on our own. Well, that's really the arrogant thing. And so today, I hope you're encouraged, church, to come and find fresh grace and mercy, to bring timely aid to you because of what Jesus has done for us. He invites you to come boldly today, to come frankly, genuinely, vulnerably to him, and to find mercy and grace for your time of need. God bless. We look forward to sharing with you more of these reflections as we continue to read through the New Testament together.